James had walked this road 100 times before. It was the path he took every evening from his office to his small apartment on the edge of town. The sidewalks were cracked, the streetlights flickered sometimes, and the scent of fried food from the diner on 8th Street always drifted into the air around sunset. It was familiar, predictable, just the way he liked it. He wasn't in any rush that day. It had been a quiet shift, and the late afternoon breeze felt surprisingly cool for early summer. With one hand in his pocket and the other holding his phone, he scrolled through messages, barely looking up as he walked. Then something made him stop. It wasn't a sound exactly, more like the sudden sense that something was there, just outside his line of sight. He looked up and scanned the sidewalk ahead. At first glance, everything seemed normal. A streetlight buzzed softly. A few leaves blew across the road. A delivery truck turned the corner and disappeared. Then he saw it. Near the base of the rusted lamppost, huddled between the metal pole and a trash bin, was a small, unmoving bundle. It could have been a piece of clothing, maybe a lost sweater or an old towel. But something about it looked off. James squinted, stepping a little closer. That's when the bundle shifted. It was just a small movement, like a shiver or a twitch, but enough to make his heart skip. James walked toward it slowly now, careful not to make any sudden moves. As he got closer, the shape became clearer. A tiny puppy, curled into itself, head resting on its paws. Its fur was matted and dirty, covered in dust and dry leaves. Its body was so thin, James could see the outline of its ribs. The puppy didn't bark or growl. It didn't even flinch. It just looked up at him with these wide, glassy eyes that seemed too big for its little face. James felt something stir in his chest, confusion, sympathy, and something he couldn't quite name. He glanced around. There was no one else on the street. No leash. No food bowls nearby. No one calling out a name. The puppy was just there, alone, silent. He crouched down, unsure of what he was doing. The puppy blinked but didn't move. James reached out slowly. The puppy let him. Its fur was coarse and tangled, and its body trembled under his touch. James stayed like that for a few moments, kneeling on the sidewalk with the world going on around him. The cars drove by, lights turned on in nearby windows, and a couple walked past without even noticing. But James couldn't take his eyes off the little creature in front of him. He wasn't planning to stop that day, but somehow this moment felt different, like something had shifted. And deep down, James knew his walk home was about to become anything but normal. The moment James met the puppy's eyes, something unspoken passed between them, something raw and deeply human, though neither of them spoke a word. The puppy looked up at him with a mix of fear, hope, and quiet exhaustion. It wasn't barking. It wasn't moving. It simply stared as if waiting for a decision James didn't know he was about to make. He looked around again, trying to spot anyone nearby. A dog owner calling out. A door opening. Maybe someone coming back for their lost pet. But the street remained empty. Just a few cars in the distance and the hum of city life carrying on without them. James looked back down. The puppy was still staring. He could see now just how rough a shape it was in. Its fur, which might have once been light brown or golden, was now coated in dirt and grime. There were little patches missing, revealing dry skin beneath. Its ears drooped low, and its paws were covered in small cuts and scabs. But the most heartbreaking thing wasn't its condition, it was how silent it was. No cries, no howling, just quiet breathing and those big, pleading eyes. He slowly sat down on the curb beside it, unsure why he was even staying. Maybe he thought someone would show up. Maybe he was trying to convince himself he didn't have time for this. But the puppy didn't let him look away. And that stillness, it didn't feel normal. It felt like the kind of stillness that comes after giving up. "Where did you come from?" James asked softly, more to himself than the dog. The puppy blinked slowly, then tucked its nose back into its paws, as if trying to disappear again. For a second, James wondered if it had escaped from somewhere, maybe a backyard or a nearby alley, but its condition told a different story. This wasn't a pet that had been missing for a few hours. This was a puppy that had been forgotten. His phone buzzed in his pocket. a reminder, something about bills. He ignored it. He couldn't pull himself away yet, not while the puppy was like this. He reached into his bag and pulled out a half-eaten sandwich he'd packed that morning. Carefully, he tore off a small piece and laid it on the ground a few inches away. The puppy didn't move at first, but then, after a long pause, it slowly stretched its neck forward and sniffed. Another moment passed. Then it inched closer and took the food in its mouth, chewing slowly. James watched every movement. It wasn't just hunger, it was survival. That's when it hit him. This wasn't just a sad animal. This was a life hanging by a thread, waiting for someone, anyone, to care. And in that quiet corner of the city, under the glow of a flickering streetlight, James realized he might be the only one who could. James stood up slowly, brushing dust off his pants. He told himself he couldn't take this puppy with him. He had no experience caring for an animal, no extra money for food or vet bills, and a small apartment that barely fit his own needs. Besides, maybe the puppy belonged to someone nearby, someone who would come looking for it soon. He took a few steps away, trying to leave the puppy behind on the cold sidewalk. The sky was growing darker now, streetlights flickering on one by one. James told himself he was doing the right thing. But then he heard it, a soft, tentative paw step behind him. He stopped. The puppy was following. Its little legs were slow but determined, and it kept looking up at him with those wide, trusting eyes. James's heart tightened. He tried to ignore it and quickened his pace. The puppy matched him step for step. Then James stopped completely. The puppy came up and sat at his feet, looking up with an expression that said, "Please don't leave me." James sighed. He didn't want to be responsible, but looking down at the tiny creature that had nothing left but him was harder than he thought. The puppy was so small, so fragile, like a thread barely holding on. James knelt down and reached out his hand. The puppy sniffed it, then leaned into the touch. The fur was still dirty, and the little body trembled. But the puppy didn't pull away. Instead, it crawled onto James's lap, curling up tightly. The decision was made, even if James hadn't fully accepted it yet. He looked around again. The street was empty except for the distant hum of cars. The world was moving on, but this moment felt frozen. It was just him and the puppy. He whispered, "Okay, little guy, I guess you're coming with me." James stood back up, this time holding the puppy gently in his arms. The warmth against his chest was comforting in a way he hadn't expected. He felt a sudden surge of protectiveness. As he walked, the puppy nuzzled closer, resting its head on his shoulder. It was quiet, but James sensed relief in its small body. It had found something safe, even if only for now. The walk to his apartment felt longer than usual. He thought about all the things he would have to change: his routine, his space, his plans. But for once, those worries faded into the background. When he reached his building, he paused in the lobby and looked down at the puppy. It looked back, eyes bright despite everything. James smiled softly. He didn't know what the future held. He didn't know if he was ready for this new responsibility. But one thing was clear: this puppy had chosen him, and he wasn't going to walk away. For the first time in a long while, James felt a flicker of hope. That first night in James' apartment was quieter than he expected. The city's usual sounds filtered softly through the window: distant car horns, a dog barking blocks away, the hum of life moving on outside. But inside, there was a fragile new rhythm. James sat on the couch, watching the puppy eat the food he had laid out. The little dog's eyes were still wary, but showed a flicker of trust. After finishing, it crawled into the makeshift bed James had prepared. A towel folded on the floor and curled into a tight ball. James felt a strange mix of exhaustion and relief. He hadn't planned on taking a dog home that night. In fact, he was certain he wouldn't. But here he was, sitting in a quiet apartment with a small creature who needed him, for now. The hours passed slowly. James tried to focus on a book, but found his eyes drifting back to the puppy. Every so often, the puppy would twitch or let out a soft whimper, and James would lean forward to check on it. The shivers still came and went, reminders of the cold night it had survived outdoors. At one point, James stood up and went to the kitchen for a glass of water. The puppy's soft whines followed him. He paused, then scooped it up gently, feeling the tiny weight against his chest. "Don't worry," James whispered. "You're safe now." He carried the puppy to his bedroom and set it down on a folded blanket by his bed. The puppy looked up with wide eyes, unsure but curious. James lay down beside it, careful not to move too suddenly. The puppy settled closer, resting its head on his arm. It was a small thing, a fragile connection in an uncertain world, but it filled a loneliness James hadn't realized he felt. Throughout the night, James kept one hand near the puppy, ready to comfort it if it woke. The puppy didn't cry, but the occasional soft breathing and shifting in its sleep kept James awake longer than usual. By morning, James was surprised at how naturally the puppy had made itself at home. It followed him into the kitchen, wagging its tail weakly but with clear affection. James laughed quietly at the sight, realizing that what was meant to be just for tonight was quickly becoming something more. The puppy, now named Buddy, seemed to sense that James was different, not just another stranger, but someone who might stay. James felt a responsibility that both scared and comforted him. He reached out to a local vet the next day, setting up an appointment to check Buddy's health. He knew it wouldn't be easy. There were vaccinations, treatments, and possibly a lot of care ahead, but he was ready to try. As the days went on, James found his schedule shifting around Buddy. Morning walks replaced sleeping in. Afternoons were spent researching how to care for a puppy, and evenings, once quiet and solitary, now echoed with playful barks and the soft patter of paws. James still wondered about Buddy's past, about where he had come from and who might miss him. But slowly, those questions faded under the weight of the new bond forming between them. What had started as a chance encounter on a street corner was becoming a new beginning for both of them. The days after Buddy came into James' life were anything but ordinary. His once predictable routine began to shift in ways he hadn't anticipated. Mornings started earlier, not with the alarm clock, but with gentle nudges and soft licks from a small, eager puppy. At first, James struggled to wake up, rubbing his eyes and wondering if this was really happening. But Buddy's insistence was impossible to ignore. James started taking Buddy on walks around the neighborhood, discovering parts of the town he rarely noticed before. The streets that once seemed dull and repetitive now held new sights and sounds: children playing in parks, neighbors waving hello, and other dogs excitedly sniffing Buddy's scent. Each walk was an adventure. Buddy explored every tree, every crack in the sidewalk, and every blade of grass with relentless curiosity. Sometimes, Buddy would chase after a falling leaf or pause to watch a squirrel dart of a tree. James found himself laughing more than usual, the joy contagious. At home, the little apartment transformed. Toys appeared, simple balls and chew sticks, scattered across the floor like tiny treasures. The old towels became a cozy bed. James found himself cleaning more often, not just out of necessity, but because he wanted to create a safe and welcoming space for Buddy. Neighbors began to notice. Mrs. Perez from down the hall complimented how good Buddy looked and offered tips on local vets and groomers. The mailman started waiting patiently for Buddy's enthusiastic greetings. Even James's coworkers commented on the changes in his demeanor. More energy, more smiles. But life with Buddy wasn't always easy. The puppy was still learning, testing boundaries, and occasionally getting into trouble. James woke up to chewed shoes and found torn papers in unexpected places. There were moments of frustration, exhaustion, and doubt. Was he doing enough? Could he provide the care Buddy deserved? Yet, despite the challenges, James felt something growing inside him, a sense of purpose and connection. Buddy wasn't just a pet. He was a companion, a friend who filled a space James didn't know was empty. On weekends, James started visiting the park, letting Buddy run freely off the leash under careful watch. He met other dog owners, exchanging stories and advice. Buddy's playful nature made friends quickly, and James found himself feeling less alone. The bond between them deepened with each passing day. Buddy learned to trust James, following him eagerly and resting calmly when he was tired. James learned to read Buddy's needs when he was anxious, when he was happy, and when he just wanted to be close. James reflected on how different his life had become. The quiet solitude he once cherished now felt lonely without Buddy by his side. The puppy's presence brought warmth, laughter, and a new kind of responsibility. What started as a random encounter on a dimly lit street corner had blossomed into a profound friendship. James realized that sometimes life's biggest surprises come when you least expect them. Just as James was settling into this new rhythm with Buddy, the past came knocking in a way he hadn't expected. It started with a knock on his apartment door one rainy afternoon. James wasn't expecting anyone. He wiped his hands on a towel and opened the door cautiously. Standing there was a woman in her late 30s, her eyes tired but hopeful. In her hand, she held a small poster with a picture of a puppy, Buddy. James's heart skipped a beat. "I'm sorry to bother you," she said softly. "My name is Clara. I think that puppy might be mine." James invited her in, trying to hide the mix of emotions swirling inside. He looked at Buddy, who wagged his tail cautiously but didn't try to run or hide. Clara explained how Buddy had been her dog since he was a puppy. She told James about how she had lost him during a move to a new apartment complex. She had searched everywhere, putting up flyers, calling shelters, checking social media, but had given up hope after weeks of no answers. James listened carefully. He could see the pain in Clara's eyes, the worry and love she had for Buddy. He realized this little puppy had been someone's whole world before finding him. But James also thought about the nights he had stayed up caring for Buddy, the walks they had shared, and the bond they had formed. He wasn't sure what to say. They talked about Buddy's health, his condition when James found him, and how much he had improved since. Clara smiled with relief seeing her dog healthier and happier. Still, a difficult question hung in the air. What should happen now? Should Buddy go back to Clara, the owner who had clearly missed him, or stay with James, who had saved him and given him a second chance? James wanted to do the right thing. He didn't want to hold Buddy away from his real home, but he also knew that Buddy had chosen him in a way he couldn't explain. After some thought, they agreed on a trial period. Buddy would spend time with Clara, and James would stay in contact. They wanted to make sure Buddy's best interests came first. The days that followed were bittersweet. James missed Buddy deeply but knew this was the right thing to do. Clara called often, sending pictures and updates. Buddy seemed happy, but James noticed subtle changes. The way Buddy looked for him in photos, the small hesitation in his eyes. James realized that sometimes love means letting go, even when it hurts. But he also hoped that this wasn't the end of their story. Because in the back of his mind, he knew that some bonds don't break, no matter what. The days stretched on, each one a mix of hope and heartache for James. He kept in touch with Clara, hearing about Buddy's adventures in her home. Buddy was healthy, loved, and well cared for. Yet James couldn't shake the feeling that something was missing. Then one afternoon, Clara called with surprising news. "James," she said, voice warm but hesitant, "I've been thinking a lot. Buddy has been happy here, but I can tell he misses you too. I don't want him to feel torn between two homes. I want what's best for him." James felt a lump in his throat. He knew what Clara meant. Buddy had formed a bond with both of them, a bond too strong to ignore. They agreed on a plan. Buddy would stay with James full-time, and Clara would remain a part of his life. She wanted to visit, to be involved in Buddy's care, and to watch him grow. For James, this was more than a relief, it was a gift. He realized he wasn't alone in caring for Buddy. There was a community of people who loved this little dog and wanted what was best for him. With Buddy back by his side, life began to settle into a new rhythm. The puppy, now stronger and healthier, thrived in James's care. They explored parks, learned new tricks, and shared quiet moments that felt like a language only they understood. James's world, once quiet and solitary, was now filled with laughter, warmth, and companionship. Buddy's presence changed him in ways he hadn't expected. He became more patient, more responsible, and more open to the unexpected joys life could bring. One evening, as the sun set in soft shades of orange and pink, James sat on the porch with Buddy lying at his feet. He thought back to the moment he had first found this tiny, trembling puppy on that cold street corner. How a chance encounter had changed everything. James smiled, feeling a deep sense of gratitude. Sometimes, life's surprises come wrapped in the smallest packages, ones that choose us just as much as we choose them. In that quiet moment, James knew this was only the beginning. For both of them. Once inside his apartment, James set the puppy gently on the floor. The small space suddenly felt much bigger, filled with new possibilities and uncertainties. He looked down at the puppy, who was still trembling slightly but seemed calmer now that it was indoors. James knelt and pulled out his phone again. His first thought was to see if the puppy had a collar or any identification. But the little dog's neck was bare. No tag, no name, nothing to tell him who it belonged to. The thought hit him hard. This wasn't just a lost puppy, this was a stray. He sat on the floor, gently stroking the puppy's head. The puppy leaned into his touch, finally allowing itself to relax a little. James knew the first step was to find out if someone was missing their dog. He had to try, even if he didn't want to admit it meant the puppy might not stay. He began by calling the local animal shelter. The voice on the other end was polite but worn. They told him the shelter was full and that strays were picked up only during the day. They suggested posting flyers or checking online lost pet groups. James opened the community website and quickly typed out a message with a photo of the puppy. Found near 8th Street, no collar. "Is this your dog?" he asked, hoping for replies, but the hours passed with silence. Determined, James went door to door in his neighborhood the next day. He asked neighbors if anyone had lost a puppy, showing the picture on his phone, but no one recognized the little dog. At a nearby corner store, the cashier shook her head. "Haven't seen that one around here. Or thing looks like it's been on the streets a while." James felt a mix of sadness and guilt. How long had this puppy been alone? How had no one noticed? That evening, back at his apartment, James gave the puppy a warm bath. The dirty water turned brown, and James saw patches of skin irritated from dirt and fleas. The puppy whimpered softly but didn't resist. After drying it with a towel, James wrapped the little dog in an old shirt to keep it warm. He laid down some food and water. The puppy ate hungrily, then curled up on the makeshift bed James had prepared, a towel on the floor next to his own chair. James sat nearby, watching it carefully. It was hard to believe such a tiny creature had so much strength just to survive. Despite his efforts, no messages came, no calls, no lost owner appeared. The reality settled in. This puppy might not have a home to go back to. James thought about shelters again, but the ones nearby were overcrowded, and he wasn't sure he could just hand the puppy over. What if it was put down? The thought made his chest tighten. He sighed and looked down at the puppy, now asleep but still twitching occasionally in its dreams. The puppy had chosen him. Maybe it was time to stop hoping for someone else to step in. That night, James sat on the edge of his bed, feeling the weight of what he had taken on. This wasn't just a passing moment anymore. It was the start of something new, something neither he nor the puppy had expected.